All right. Hello. Uh, Chris, I may have, oh no, you're there. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Sticky Notes chat. I'm Amanda Stockwell. I'm here with Chris Nauder. Cory's not with us today. He's doing some client work, I believe. But we are on, in this case, 2 instead of 3 user researchers talking about getting stuff done. And in this particular week, we are going to be talking about the debate that never dies in the UX world. Coding. Do UX people need to be able to code? It's not our primary responsibility, but is it a useful skill to have? And oh boy, do I have so many thoughts. So I hope that some of you pipe in and ask questions. You can do so on the live stream. You can always, email or tweet at us or that kind of stuff too. But for now, if you want us to answer it live, the best way is to ask us questions on the stream. So with that, I will kind of open it up and just say, Chris, I know I have a lot of thoughts and feels about coding. I would love to get just kind of like your very most basic, when you hear the ongoing debate, what's your initial thought?
My initial thought is eye roll.
Eye roll.
It's like, oh my goodness, not again. So this idea, do people need to be able to code if you're in UX? I mean, my quick take is no, but it helps, or no, but understanding the terminology helps.
Okay, well, so maybe what we should do is take a moment to step back and talk about what we even mean by coding, because I think this is
Right.
one of the places where some of the confusion and debate starts, right? So already, UX is a really wide bucket of skills, right? And I think everybody knows that. And one of the things that I like to distinguish is that it is not just a UX person's responsibility to impact the experience that a user has. So I give the example all the time, especially in these COVID days. If you're watching Netflix and it times out while you're, like peak time watching the last episode of a series, is that a good experience? No. You're frustrated AF. But is that the responsibility of, say, the UX researcher or designer? Also, no. So there's plenty of things that impact a user's experience that aren't necessarily under the purview of somebody with UX in their title. So I want to just be clear about that too. It's not that I don't think development impacts experience. I 100% think it does. And that's why I always say things like, make sure you include developers and designers and other people in research sessions. Make sure that you advocate for things that would be good for a user that are not just design related. For instance, like making sure that things work well at different speeds, or that they are, kind of come through quickly. Oh, Chris is back. Hello again. Make sure that, things might be mobile friendly when they need to be, or visible in really bright light. Like there's lots of things that impact experience that don't fall duly or solely on the kind of UX professional in your organization. However,
Big breath. However.
Yeah. However, I feel like, of course, it's useful to understand enough about software development and code if you're working on digital products or websites. It is very helpful to be able to speak some of the language of your colleagues who are working on development. It is helpful to know if things are even like technically feasible when you are suggesting solutions. But I feel like it is an arbitrary gate that we put up to people to say, you can't play with us, you can't be in UX because you don't know how to code. And so that is my primary frustration about this whole conversation, is that it feels like gatekeeping to me, because it's not actually practically a part of most UX people's roles, or many UX people's roles. And it's not to say that you can't have come from a development background and be really great at UX. It doesn't mean you can't have multiple skill sets. I just don't think it's necessary in order to get into and be successful in the industry. And so I will pause there because I've been talking for like 5 or 6 minutes. now
No,
Chris, now
keep
that you're
going.
back. So I want to get your 2 cents on what do you think kind of the line is in terms of like what is helpful versus what is like try to cram too many skills or too many things into one focus.
Well, I've worked with some super awesome developers. And although in the past I've had a job that was kind of a programming job, after working with people like that, I feel embarrassed to even mention that that was ever one of my roles because I'm just not that good at coding. And I, there's just so much. Do you want to really be this kind of jack of all trades, master of none? Or do you want to really focus on being really good at something? There are people out there who focus on being really good at coding, and I'd rather focus on being really good at adding the thing which I know I can add to the conversation, which is the user experience side of things. So I will work really closely with developers. And I think my knowledge of some of that terminology has helped me to have conversations with them which let them which let us proceed faster, let them respect me more, and potentially also um, just give us give us that whole capacity to really understand what each other's talking about through knowing a little bit more about development. But I don't want to be the expert in development in coding.
Yeah.
That's not where I want to be. So why would I even advertise it as a skill set I've got? I'm not going to. I'm going to advertise my skill set as being the user experience skill set, and then just make it pleasant for people around me, like developers, when I'm working with them by having taken the little step to learn a little bit of their language. It's like when you go to a foreign country, you find people open up a lot more to you when they realize that you've taken an effort to be able to try and speak their language, even if they say, "Look, it's okay, let's just speak English. Please don't massacre my language
That
anymore."
happens. I know that happens frequently. I will often have my phone up and be like, bonjour. And people are like, hi, it's fine. I'm like, sorry.
And then they roll their eyes, and in the background they're going, "Oh, stupid Americans," or "Stupid
I
English," or
know.
whatever. Actually, it's the English typically, but
No, oh
if you
no, I think Americans win that war. We'll have that in discussion another time. But
okay, well maybe, but so that analogy does come through into the workspace too. It's like if you can at least show that you've got a modicum of understanding of the language, the culture of the people
yeah,
you're working with, it goes a long way. And it's not just true of code. It's true of if you know a little bit about marketing, if you know a little bit about business development, if you know a little bit about how uh, the stresses are on a project manager. All those things can really help you understand what their role is so that when you're then talking with them about their jobs or talking with them about getting things fixed, you already know what's kind of likely to be successful in that conversation and what won't. You know that some of your recommendations are just are not even going to be implementable. Or alternatively, when a developer says, "Oh no, we can't do that," you could say, "Are you sure?" Yeah. And so
yeah,
yeah, that's my take on it. It's like I don't want to be fluent in that language because but I have at least a tourist's understanding of the language. Enough to be dangerous. That's probably a bad analogy, but enough to at least have a conversation with people in their own terms. Does that make sense?
it totally does. And one of the things I think maybe that like sticks at me when we talk about this is that I would argue exactly your point, which is that it is useful to speak the language as a UX person of whoever else you're working with. That's one of
Right.
the kind of like superpowers that especially a
Right.
UX researcher has. I currently am working on projects in cancer research databases. Am I a cancer researcher? No.
No.
Do I know or did I know most of their like ins and outs of their roles?
No.
Definitely not. um, but I learned from them and I could kind of learn to speak their language and I could, kind of like come to them where they were so that they could feel comfortable talking to me. The same
Right.
thing is true, whether I'm conducting research or if I am, talking to the marketing person that I'm, collaborating with around my team. I think one thing that bothers me is that nobody says that UX people should do sales. Nobody says UX people should do marketing. Nobody says UX people should do this and that and all the other things. The only thing that people argue that UX people should be able to do is code. And while obviously there's more crossover, or actually maybe not obviously, there is definite crossover between UX research and design and development, but they are different skill sets, and I think they ought to be honored as such. And another thing that you kind of brought up is that sometimes you think that developers will respect you more if you know a little bit of code. And I hate that, but I think that it's true, because I think that there can sometimes be a little bit of a bias against like, oh, that's just that UX is easy. I could make it look pretty if I needed to, or if I wanted to. I just am not worried about that.
Right.
And I think that there is sort of a, like, there are better ways in my mind to go about garnering respect from your teammates than trying to learn their job. Because frankly, at least speaking for myself, I will never be as good at development as the people that I collaborate with, because I don't like it. And I don't want to be a developer. So I can learn some things, and I have learned plenty of things, but I don't, unless I dedicated the next 15 years of my career to being a developer, I'm never going to know as much about development as I know about UX right now. And, so
and there's this one thing we ought to differentiate between is UX as we're talking about it, and UX as in front-end developer, because there are people who have a development role. They are elbow deep in code all day long, but they're a front-end developer rather than a back-end developer. So they're actually working on the UI. Those people, yes, they're doing a UX role potentially. They're also doing a development role. Cory has a distinction he makes between this. What's the primary thing you do? Are you primarily doing UX, or are you primarily doing development? So yeah, I mean, primarily, if you're putting together a site, I would say primarily you're doing development. And even if you're doing front-end development, you've got UX responsibilities, that's part of what you do. It's not the thing you're doing primarily. For us as UX researchers or as interaction designers, there's a difference. The primary thing we're doing is the interaction side of things, not the coding side of things.
yeah.
There's an interesting comment about if you want to be a UX designer in AR and VR, you'll be required to be a developer too. I think that so this is from Ella. It's an interesting comment, because I think this is one of the things about new areas, isn't it? Is until the area becomes, this may change as the platform is more widely used and teams are formed, until there's some kind of commonality of understanding about what AR and VR even is, and teams working through this. Yeah, probably it's because the technology isn't mature enough that there are the front end tools, that there are the ways for UI people to do their job without being in the code all the time.
Well, yeah, and by that respect, I think that's totally true. Anytime there's something super new, typically people need to come to those areas with really diverse skill sets,
Yeah.
because they're typically, to your point, not, developed enough to have front ends that make it possible to not code. I mean, when I first started using word processors, I had to code. So I think there's also a distinction too between, like, do you know enough, like, HTML, CSS, or a little bit of this and that to make some changes on a personal website? Sure. That is a very different thing than saying, as part of my professional identity, I also code. I would never say, I actually change code, like small bits of, HTML or whatever, all the time. But I never say, I am a coder. It is part of my skill set. I never sell that that's something that I'm, that's something I focus on.
If anybody who actually knew how to code properly looked at any of the PHP I've hacked for websites, they'd be like, "Oh my goodness, why did you just oh no, just move over, and let me." Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a difference between knowing some of the basics about how a programming language works and being able to make it sing. And I'm not in the position of making that stuff sing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think there's a difference between, let's say that you are an interaction designer and you want to make an interactive prototype because it's important to you to kind of flesh out those interactions to test them with users. That is still a really different skill set, I would say. I would kind of say than being a fully focused developer whose job is to ensure that things are built properly and in a scalable way and in a way that
Yes.
will have they'll be fast enough. And micro interactions can be really important, especially on like mobile or tablet devices. Having enough skill to be able to make a prototype, even a really high fidelity
Yeah.
prototype, do what you want it to do and have it be the person responsible for having it be scalable and working with the rest of the code base and working as fast as it should be, and taking into consideration all those other things. Those are still, to me, really different focuses in a role. Sure, they use some of the same skill sets, some of the same potentially language, but they're used for different purposes. And I think that's
Right.
one of the distinctions that I make that maybe not everybody does. But I also, I also think that, like, even if you don't have any of that, even small amount of I could hack this together enough to change your website, that doesn't mean you can't be in UX. And it doesn't mean that you should be afraid to apply things. It doesn't mean you won't be able to get roles. Um, there, for better or worse, there are no requirements to being in UX. But I hate that people try to make this one, because I think that it leaves out a lot of people who could potentially be really great as UX researchers or information designers or lots of other things. And I feel like one of the ongoing other conversations, on top of whether or not UX people should code, one of the other conversations that happens a lot is like, what do we do with this gap between all of these people who want to get into UX and all of these senior level roles? And I'm
Right.
not suggesting that getting rid of the coding requirement gets rid of that problem, but what I am suggesting is that there are probably people who have a lot of really applicable skills who could be really successful in roles, but don't apply or don't get chosen because they don't code. And most of the people who do not code are not white men.
Yeah, if there's any discipline which has been that sort of archetypal white man thing, it's coding in the past. I mean, there's lots of pushes to change that now, but and just to be clear, it's not an exclusive white men club. There's some of the best coders
No,
I've worked with have been not white and not men. Um, so, but yes, you're right. It it bears talking about that. Um, you may stepping back a bit. Often you'll see jobs advertised, UX jobs advertised needing this, and you have to ask yourself, why is that in there? And
yeah,
are you actually introducing bias into your recruiting by requiring that? Are you excluding people that you shouldn't be excluding just by having this requirement in there? And is it really a requirement, or is it just a thing that you've checked a box to say, oh yeah, code, yeah, they should know. They should know how Figma and Sketch, or Figma or Sketch, and then they should also know how to code. It's like, yeah, let's check these boxes down. It's like,
yeah.
really,
They should also be
really?
able to do a split, and they should be able to bake perfect sourdough bread, and they can also order coffee well.
Okay, you've lost me there. The coffee, all the rest, yeah, but you lost me at coffee. I can't make good coffee. Yeah,
Yeah, well, and so I think that it's something that gets maybe not talked about a lot, but one of the reasons that I have such a strong reaction to the let's stop pretending that everybody in UX needs to code sort of thing is because I think that, one, it's just not true. I think there's plenty of really successful people in UX
right,
who do not code and do not
right,
want to.
right,
And two, I think that it acts as a barrier, intentional or not. Maybe in some cases it is, maybe in some cases it is intentional, and that's
I
not
hope
cool
not.
anyway.
Right,
Hope not. But in some cases it might not be intentional, but I think that it's true that Um, there just frankly are a lot less women and less white people who would consider themselves skilled enough in coding to feel like they could apply for those jobs.
Mhm.
And I don't like that barrier, and I don't think that it's good for UX, and I don't think it's good for the teams that they'll be on. And so I really wish that we would stop having this debate, but not because I don't want to talk about it, but because I wish that we could come to some sort of
I think we
agreement
could
that,
resolve the debate rather than, yes. I mean, it's like we have to keep having this debate until we actually have a resolution, and preferably a resolution which is just stop already with the requirement.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I know, I agree. So coding, not necessary. Anybody out there who might be interested in a UX job, I would say if you know how to, great, it can be applicable. But if you don't know how, that does not mean that you cannot be successful in UX.
Mm.
And it does not mean that you should not apply for jobs or that you won't have skills that are totally useful in the
Mm.
UX realm.
Did we just have violent agreement
I
on a
think,
topic?
I think maybe we did.
Wow. And I mean,
Mm,
so the thing, so to expand on this whole thing of coding, I think there's also different levels, and just even saying the word coding, the first thing that comes to mind is people start thinking about somebody working on a screen with a black background with white text on it, and kind of so in some programming language, and they're just like typing away in their little office in the dark and stuff like that. Code, the, if that's what you think of as coding, that's not everything that there is to coding, and it might be that you actually can code, you just don't think of it that way. It's more of a frame of mind, I think, than it is an actual um, necessarily a skill. I'm just thinking about as even people who are developers change the tools they're using through their careers, often several times.
yeah.
Um, but so the tools that we use as UX people, you've already mentioned, if you're creating a prototype that's got some kind of interactivity in it, you're coding. You're creating basically things like if-then statements. You're creating behaviors, and you're telling the behaviors to be triggered by certain events. You're creating timelines, and things happen on that timeline. All of that stuff is coding. So, and don't let anybody tell you any different. So, so it might be that you think, oh, I can't say that I'm a coder, but actually you're doing that already. Um,
That's a
there's
good
lots of
point.
tools.
A large part of
Yeah.
programming or coding is solving problems, just with specific tools that are
Mm.
individual coding languages. But there are tons of ways to
Mhm.
solve problems. And to your point, if you're building if-then statements about prototypes in Vision,
Mhm.
um,
Uh, Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
that
mean,
could
what you're
be.
doing
So
there is you've got a little inspector window, and you're putting something in the inspector window. You're putting something in, and you're saying, well, when this thing happens, make this thing happen. Just because you're doing it in a visual environment doesn't stop that from being a programming thing you're doing. There are other people who do that if-then statement using text, and yes, that might be more efficient. It might be the kind of thing you're putting into production more. You wouldn't necessarily be using a visual coding language for something that's going to go into production, but it's still coding, and it's still thinking in that same mindset. And so it's still demonstrated that you've got that potential to do that.
that's true. And I want to be clear to say I love people who code, and I think coding is a wonderful skill set. I just hate that because I think part of what it feels like to me is there is sort of sometimes a bias of like if you can't code, like you're not really that smart, or your contributions aren't really that valuable,
Right.
or the ones who code are the ones who make the thing work, and therefore the only ones who contribute to the success of a thing. And let me tell you, I have seen plenty of really smart developers and engineers build stuff that not a single person uses
Hmm.
or nobody can figure out how to use, and
And
they are
there
not
there
that
is
I
there is some
wouldn't count that success.
there is some truth to that. I mean, definitely, places I've worked in the past that shall remain nameless uh, paid developers more than pretty much anybody else. It was the primary job role. It was the thing that people aspired to, and if you couldn't get in as a developer, you'd get in as test. then you'd go to software developer in test, then you'd move on to a developer role. So it was this kind of progression that people were moving up the chain to being a developer. So it was the most respected role. But that was a very R&D focused environment. And yep, lots of the stuff those people developed wasn't necessarily that amazing. And like you say, intelligence, there's different forms of intelligence. I mean, whether or not you subscribe to the idea of emotional intelligence, there's definitely, let's call it sensitivities that different people have. And it might be that you have sensitivities in a different space from somebody whose primary role is coding. And by bringing that to the table, you're bringing a different perspective to the table that actually helps make the end product better by helping that person whose primary responsibility is coding to understand something about their users they otherwise would not have understood, and to make that software that otherwise nobody would have been able to use slightly more acceptable to people.
Yeah. And I want to go back to something I've said before when we were talking about collaborating, is that I absolutely value when, people who are developers are working with me on research or vice versa. And I always sort of remind my teammates, like, you are in your job role because that is the thing you're an expert at. I am in this job role because this is the thing I'm an expert at. And I think maybe this goes a little bit to the debate too of like generalist versus specialist, but which I don't know that we necessarily want to get into, but I would say that even a generalist, there's going to be limits. You can only be so far and so deep in so many things, except for in very, very, very special cases. And I think that even if you're a little bit wider breadth, I think it's okay to say, here's where my frame is. Here's where your frame is. Here's where we overlap, and that's important because it helps us to communicate. To your earlier point, it helps to be able to speak the same language. There's certainly some of that, but I actually think, and in my own experience, I've been able to get people to respect me more when I said, here's what I know, and I am awesome at this, and I don't know that much about this other thing. So I'm going to rely on you to tell me your feedback or give me your perspective on that thing, because that is your area of expertise. And this is my area of expertise. And between the two of us or four of us or whatever, like, we're going to make a really awesome thing together. And so I would maybe recommend to people, and this works differently for different people, but I would maybe recommend to people to kind of maybe let yourself off the hook in some sense, but also be real clear about, like, here's what I know and I'm good at, right? Like, and it's okay that realm of things isn't all of them. Because I know, especially like earlier in my career, I didn't want to be the kind of person who didn't like to code. I wanted to be able to at least say I could do it, even if I didn't like it. And I think that sometimes people have a hard time saying, yeah, this is my slice of things. But I think that actually when it comes back to that respect piece, sometimes people will respect you more, actually, if you're like, yep, here's my area of knowledge. This part I got, that part you got, and kind of see people where they are and honor them for what they have. And also, nobody doesn't like to be told, you are the expert at this thing, you tell me.
Yeah, yes. Let's massage some egos along the way. It's true. I mean, if you can, somebody's going to see through you pretty quickly if you did claim to have that knowledge, but they're the one who actually does have the knowledge. They'll very soon work out that, yeah, no, actually. And then are they going to respect you for having lied to them? No. Whereas, like you say, if you're honest up front and you say, here's my area of expertise, but I don't know your area of expertise and I need your help. That's a great way of getting somebody on your side rather than turning them into somebody who just doesn't respect you. So yeah, it's a perfect way forward.
Yeah. But I think there's a fine line between I can speak your language, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, I like vaguely remember that from a long time ago in college when I took computer science classes.
Right.
Versus, because I think one of the other things we haven't maybe yet talked about is I think sometimes some of the tension that comes between like UX and design and development is because there are some people who maybe by virtue of the kind of environment they were working in, they've worked on a lot of different stuff, or they were put in roles where they had to do a little bit of everything. Or if, maybe just they like doing a little bit of everything, or maybe they didn't feel comfortable picking one thing. But sometimes there are people who say that they are UX research, UI design, front end, back end,
Oh,
unipony, narwhal corns.
unicorns. Yeah.
Yes. And I
Oh, you
think
went there.
that's,
You went there. Oh, Amanda, now
oh,
you're in trouble.
I know, you know what? I have a whole series of talks about not being a unicorn. I am not afraid. Come at me. Come at me. Like, DM me if you need me. At me. I do not care. But I'm not to say that there aren't people who have multiple interests, and not to say
Mm.
that there aren't people who legitimately are skilled in multiple things. I'm just saying I've never run into any of them. I'm
I've
sure that some of you exist.
yeah,
But
I've come across a couple of people who could at least be very convincing in several roles, convincing enough for it to fly in most situations. But why would you want to do that? I mean, yes, there are some people who can do all that stuff, but does that mean you should have to as well? Why are you comparing yourself to them? And is that something that's actually helped them in their role?
well,
And do you
and
have the same
are
kind of
any of
role?
those are any of those people still doing that? Because the one
Right.
so what importantly I said can do all of those things
Mhm.
well and like to. I know people who can do multiple
Right.
of those things well. I know people who like trying all of those things. I don't know anybody who has both of those things, can do
Mhm.
all of the things well and likes doing it all at the
Mhm.
same time.
Mhm.
Partially that's because it will burn you out. It's a lot of
Yeah.
freaking work.
Yeah.
And it you get put under to be frank, like most UX people and developers I know already are under tremendous amounts of pressure. Why would you
So
try to take on an extra role or two or three? Um,
so this raises an interesting point because Natalie's saying the job
mm,
requirements for entry level jobs are very high, and it does seem that recruiters, and even I'm not sure if it's independent recruiters or whether it's no, it's everybody, it's companies. They're asking for UX unicorns.
okay,
I mean,
so
they want, and so what's your response to this? What's what's that all
well,
about?
okay, so I have a lot of thoughts about this too, but one of them is that the people who are often writing job descriptions are not the actual people who are working day to
Yep.
day in a
Yep.
UX team and frankly may not know. So that's one. Two, job descriptions in general are horrible. There is a there is a common no seriously there's a common sort of saying that if you match even like 60% of the things in any job application, not just UX, I think probably actually the percent is higher in UX, but if you match even 60% of the qualifications, that you should go ahead and apply. And
Huh.
especially with UX, at least from my experience hiring, like my UX teams were very much sort of like puzzles of different independent skills of people who were, we were all UX people,
Mhm.
but one person had more industry experience, one
Mhm.
person had more visual design and interaction experience, one person had more like content experience, and everybody maybe did a little bit of everything, but we all kind of had individual specialties. They were all hired under the same theoretical job rec, but
Right.
everybody had a little bit different thing that they were strongest at. And at any given time, a team who might be adding somebody might need, like they might say they need a UX generalist role or a UX design role, but even in UX design, you could be more on the visual side, it could be more on the
Mhm.
interaction side, you could be more on the like information design or content strategy side. There are so many nuances. And so Okay, yeah. So job descriptions suck. Most of the time, the people writing them don't actually know what the team needs, and a lot of times they're written to be sort of catch-alls um,
Right. I mean,
for
if
a
it's a large
team.
organization, you're going to have something like uh, you're going to have something like an HR department who's fielding requests from several different groups. Oh, you need a user experience level one, or is it level two? Oh, it's level two. Okay, let me see. Yes, I've got a job description for user experience level two, and
Yeah,
it came from this other team, and they had these requirements. So I'm just going to post that up there. Or, oh, wait, I've had this one from this team and this one from this team. Let me add both sets of requirements.
yeah.
And yeah,
Well,
yeah.
100%. And so that brings me to two other points. One of which, when it comes to coding in particular, I think that a lot of times what may happen is that really actually need 2 or 3 or 4 people, but they think they might be able to get away with hiring one. And so they're like, well, let's just throw everything on the job rec and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Here's
See if
what the
we might be
team needs. Yeah, we need this for our team. We need to be able to code, we need to be able to do UX, and we need somebody who can develop all the visuals for us. And yeah.
right. And so they probably actually need 2 or 3 or 4 different
Mhm,
people,
mhm,
but they only have budget for one. So
mhm.
they try. And I think that on it, well, I'm not sure exactly right now, but I think that over the years that has started to change. I think that used to be more true, and that I've seen more companies get sort of kind of, once they get that initial UX person in, who frankly was supposed to do all of those things, and then after they're there for a little while is like, all right, listen, I need some help. Um, but the other thing with that, because I wanted to mention, Julianne said that, like, made a comment about the 60% of the application comment is encouraging.
Yeah.
Um, what I want to also say to that, for people who are job searching, and we've gone off a little bit of the rails of the original conversation, but that's okay. For people who are job searching, what that also means is that if you applied to something and didn't get it, it doesn't mean that you aren't qualified.
No. Oh,
It might be that the particular set of things that they needed was like this 10%, but they mentioned all of it because they copied and pasted,
right.
or that kind of thing. So it doesn't, we could have a whole other conversation about job searching. This comes up a lot, but I like to just remind people that, on paper, or in digital requirements, you might look like exactly a good fit and then get frustrated when you don't get picked for something, or when you don't even hear back. But I just want to remind everyone, if in doubt, just assume the job rec sucked, not that you suck,
Right.
because that is
Right.
a very common thing. Or it just might just mean that they found, like, actually had one really specific thing in mind and they
Mhm,
weren't very clear about it. So,
mhm.
um,
And I think that really does bear. So one reason why if you've been following from the beginning, you just see me messing around with my camera, and you'll see there's too much light in this room and stuff. Is because I'm actually recording a course for LinkedIn right now. I've taken a little time out from recording so that we can do this live stream.
thank you, by the
Well,
way.
yeah, thank you. Uh, uh, but the course is about finding a job in UX, and one of the things I'm saying in that course, which won't be out until I think December, I'm not sure, is that it's not. It's the person the person who will be your manager when you take that job is not the person who wrote the job description. 9 times out of 10, there's going to be somebody else who wrote that job description. The conversation that the person who will be your manager has with the person who finally writes the job description and posts it could have all sorts of interpretation errors in it. So even if you match that job description, what was in the person's mind who's doing the hiring might be different. Um, so the person who sends out that job description will be checking back with everybody who sends their resumes. They'll be filtering the resumes. They'll probably be doing it digitally to start with. So you have to make sure that your resume shows your experience in a way that search results will pick up. Then they're going to kind of create this narrow little group of people, send those off to the hiring manager. The hiring manager is going to look through those and pick
Yep.
the best ones of those. So by the time you got there, yeah, you might be perfect on paper, but not for that job, not for what that person had in mind. You can't take it personally. You
Yeah.
can't let it get to you if you're not invited to interview, or if you get to interview and then it's not clear to you why you weren't taken through to the second round of interview. That's a good time to ask, hey, what should I have done differently, or that kind of thing. But if you're not the person who's brought in to interview in the first place, it doesn't mean you didn't have the skills. It doesn't mean you wouldn't have been perfect for that job. It just means that in that particular instance, your stuff didn't come to the top for what the individual was looking for.
Yeah, and I want to kind of bring up, so we've had a couple of more sort of notes about like what people are looking for and whether or
Mhm,
not they, like, with dream candidate and all that kind of stuff. So
mhm,
I think it's also it's fair to say that sometimes there are going to be companies, I think especially smaller groups, who say, yeah, we're going to hire somebody who can code and design. Just because
Right.
that's what somebody's looking for does not mean that that is the career path that you should take unless you want to. And I think that because this is a debate that comes up all the time, especially for people newer to UX, they're like, well, I'm having trouble getting a design job. Should I learn to code so that I can get a job? And I said, well, do you want the kind of job where you code? And
Right.
they say no. And I say, then no.
Yes.
If you do want the kind of job where you can code, go for it. And so I
Yeah.
think that this sort of comes back to a fundamental debate of like, what do you want to do and what sort of things do you want to be a part of your role? And sort of making the conscious decision. I remember when I first decided, like, I am only going to look for research roles. And that was scary at the time because it felt like I was cutting off a whole lot of potential
Right.
opportunity. I have been overworked for about 10 years. uh, and I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is that there's no lack of opportunity, but you have to find the right fits for you. And I know that it can be discouraging to be looking for a job, especially in the current climate. And I know that it can be discouraging to feel like, just your research skills or just your design skills or whatever, like just your whatever skills aren't enough because there are people looking for more. And what I'll say is there are always people looking for more, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that there aren't people who are looking for the skills that you have. And it's just a matter of finding the right combination of those things.
And I got to say, it's really hard to say that to somebody who's in a position of looking for a job right now, because
I know.
I'm sure that the
I
first thing
know.
on their mind is, oh my God, I need a job. I have applied to so many jobs. I just need somebody to hire me. I will wash dishes if that's what it takes.
I understand.
But there
Yeah.
is an opportunity cost to that. If you end up in the wrong role, um, you're going to end up changing roles. And yes, you can say you're doing that from a position of power. But if you're in a role for only 6 months and then you change to a different job, people are going to be like, yeah, why are you moving? And are you the kind of person who's going to want to be with me for 6 months? So it's kind of worth spending a bit more time to find a role that's really right for you. Even though I know I have been there, not in this particular round, but in previous rounds of down economies, thinking, oh my goodness, where am I going to find work? But
Yeah.
if you spend that time to really get the job that's right for you, and be careful which jobs you apply for. Be mindful about the jobs you're applying for, and is this the kind of thing, like you say, Amanda? Is this the kind of job I'd actually be happy in? Then, yeah, it's something that you'll end up better equipped to deal with that role in the future and happier in that role than if you just went for any job out of desperation or went and learnt to code out of desperation. Sure,
Yeah.
you might find you love it, but it's unlikely you would if it's not something you've tried up until now.
Well, yeah, and I want to send a big shout out and lots of love to all the people who are looking for jobs and who,
Oh, geez,
you
yeah,
know, just you know just want any old thing, even if they have to be the researcher, designer, the coder, the tester, the project
yeah,
manager, the scrum master. Like, I completely get that drive. Um, what I want to kind of maybe give people the thought of is that as somebody who's been in a position to hire, for me, what's like when I hire people and I ask them, like, well, what do you actually want to do? And they have a really clear sort of purpose of like, I'm most interactive, I'm most into interactive design. I do some visual design and have ended up doing some front end coding or some other kinds of stuff. But here's the thing I really want to do. And here's the part that I'm like passionate about, because as I said, a lot of times you're building a UX team, you're building sort of a puzzle of different
yeah,
people with kind of different
yeah.
different skills that need to all fit together. So I completely get that it's tempting to say, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do anything. But as someone who's
Whatever you
been in
want
a
me to be, I'll
position,
be it. Yes, yeah. Just give me a
yeah,
job
but
already.
yeah, but as somebody who's been in the position to do the hiring,
Mm,
I personally have preferred when people have said, well, here are things that I have done before. Here's the part that I would like to do next. This is the part I'm best at. And this is what I really can like bring strength and energy to on the team. So I mean that to be encouraging. I hope that it is. And it's not to discourage anybody from broadening their skill set. But I think that having sometimes those honest conversations with somebody who might potentially be your employer. And by the way, I have not hired people because they seemed a little too all over the place. And I knew that I needed someone who was a little bit more focused on one piece or the other. So take that for what it is. I know that it's a crazy time. So if you're job searching, I'm sending you lots of good vibes and luck. But I would say that be true to yourself and what you actually want to do, whether or not that includes coding. But don't feel like you have to in order to be successful.
Yeah. So the takeaway is then, if you can, or if you have an aptitude for that kind of thing, even if you don't like it, it might be helpful because it can let you converse better with other people on the team.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, if you don't have the aptitude, yeah, you can. It just means being honest about that with the people on the team who do have that aptitude, and leveraging their skills to help you understand the parts of the puzzle that you don't get, right?
Yeah. Yep. I 1,000% agree. And if anybody wants to fight me on whether or not I need to code to be successful, I invite you to look at my calendar.
Don't fight Amanda. Don't fight Amanda. It's not worth it. You will get hurt.
I won't physically hurt you.
I didn't say that.
All right, fair enough. So thank you for joining us for another Sticky Notes chat. This time I think it was a little, we all agreed, but we had some different points too. As always, if you have questions or things that you would like for us to cover, you can reach us lots of ways. We have a Twitter account at Sticky Notes Chat. You can email us, chat@stickynotes.chat. You can check out past episodes at our website, stickynotes.chat. And you can kind of find us all on LinkedIn. Cory will be back next week. I actually think that I will not be here next week. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out the schedule. But if you have any questions, schedules, I know, because I'm so freaking busy. That's why. with my non-coding skills. So anyway, if you have any questions for any of us, you can follow the hashtag Sticky Notes Chat on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to Chris or Cory or I, and probably we will come on here and have a lively debate about a topic of your choice.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
See ya.
Bye.